Before you hand over the keys, with host Anne-Marie Hayes, this is episode 1, Learning to Drive, with guests Robyn Robertson and Tim Baillie.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Anne-Marie Hayes, and 13 years ago, my daughter was 13 years old. I had my own corporate training company with customers like GlaxoSmithKline, Sony, Bell Canada, and Ticketmaster. Prior to that, I was the national sales manager for a computer service company, had no interest in driving at all, except to get in the car to go from one point to the other. But then I had a conversation with a friend of mine that changed my life. She's an actuary. Actuaries are the brainiacs who figure out how much you should pay for life insurance based on all kinds of statistics. And we were having a glass of wine, and I said to her, "So what's my life expectancy?" And she said, "Well, you're in reasonably good health and a non-smoker, so somewhere around 94 or 95. And I was shocked. And I said to her, I thought the number for women was more about 78 to 80. And she said, "Well, if you look at everybody from birth, that's true. But once you get past 30, the number goes way up." Well, my daughter was 13. So I'm wondering, what's this magic number about 30? And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, there are lots of different reasons. But one of the biggest reasons is that too many young people, teens and young adults, make risky choices and bad decisions, and they die too soon." Well, I've got one daughter who I adore, and I had to do something about that. So I started researching everything I could think of that might affect her. And when I got to driving, that's when I realized that this is the number one cause of death and injury to teens and young adults in North America. And it's so easily changed. And that changed my life. I kind of jumped into it. I became a driving instructor for a year. I worked for Canadian Tire, their driver's academy. Most people won't even know they had one. But I was their lead instructor for a year right out of training. I started a company called Teens Learn to Drive, which is a nonprofit based in Mississauga, Ontario, with a lot of information about teens and learning to drive. We do all kinds of wonderful things. Take a look at the website. There are just so many ways that parents can impact teens and driving. And that's what this podcast is about. It's about helping parents understand more about the importance of learning to drive. Your teen's going to be driving for the next 60 years. This is a critical life skill. And for most people, it's the most dangerous thing we do every day. But so easily we can change this. So we're not going to scare you with a whole bunch of stories. We're really going to help you understand the issues and provide you with some tools and some discussion points so that you can help your teens become really safe drivers for the rest of their lives. So today I have two wonderful people with me. I have Robyn Robertson, who is the president and CEO of TIRF, which is the Traffic Injury Research Foundation in Ottawa, Canada. And I have Tim Baillie. He was the captain of Surrey Fire Services, but is now the BC PFFA vice president, which I assume is BC Professional Firefighters Association Vice President Emeritus. And of course, Tim's not here to talk about fighting fires, but fire trucks are often the first responders when there's a crash or an incident happens. And plus, Tim is also very involved with a group that is now with TIRF called Drop It and Drive. So today we're just going to talk about teens and driving, teens and young adults, and some of the issues around driving. And I guess the first thing that I want to talk about is how complex driving is. Robyn, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Like all the things that we have to do when we're behind the wheel?
Sure. Thanks, Anne-Marie, and thanks for having us here today. So driving is a divided attention task in and of itself. That means you're dividing your attention across a couple of different activities. One is visually scanning the road and listening for important information. Then there's the motor control of the actual vehicle. And then there's the thinking part, right? Once you get all that information coming at you on the road, you have to decide what to do with it. Do I change lanes? Do I speed up? Do I slow down? So we often become very comfortable as adults driving because we do it every day. It's almost like a rote behavior where we feel like we do it without thinking about it. But for young people learning to drive, it's incredibly demanding to try and put that thinking, that seeing, and that motor control all together and make it work so that they can drive safely.
Well, I remember when I learned to drive, and you're just learning how to steer, and you're learning that to be watching the road. And then someone would say, okay, well, now you have to control your speed. And it's like, my God, you want me to do another thing? If there's a lot to do, and that's before you start to talk about trucks on the road or high speed driving or any of those other things. Tim, I know your background that you were a first responder for many, many years. And Karen Bowman, who works with both of you, shared a story with me that I would like you to tell about young people in driving.
So this happened in 1997, okay, and it's pretty, it sticks with me pretty good because my oldest son was in grade 12 that year and graduated. So what happened is Earl Marriott Secondary School is on a four-lane road in Surrey. On the other side of the road is a park. So what happens at noon? All the high school students get out, they cross in a crosswalk, go over to the park. So Tula was at noon was going to cross to the park. The first two lanes on her left, the cars yield. The next two lanes, the third lane over, car yield, and the fourth lane. So Tula entered the crosswalk, and at the same time, she was in grade 12. At the same time, a fellow grade 12 student and a rugby player had just had his parents buy him a brand new 5-liter Mustang, and was going to show everyone just how fast his car went, and accelerated quickly and struck her so hard that she cartwheeled, went above the traffic light, hit the telephone pole, and slid down dead in front of the whole school. So you can imagine, the school board flooded the school for the next few days with counselors and all that. But the most interesting thing that came out of this horrific event was, I remember I said this young man was a rugby player, that for the next month, one at a time, 24 hours a day, they stayed with this young man. It was a suicide watch. You can imagine how hard it was killing a friend in front of everyone, which included her brother.
Which brings up an incredible point, and that is that when somebody is severely injured or killed in a car crash, it's not only that immediate family, it affects everybody. The waves of emotion and life-altering change are really broad to whole communities and beyond. It's not just one number on a chart. It's a life. It's the impact on the community is enormous.
The most challenging things, I think, as young people learn to drive is the idea that it can't happen to them. And yet it does happen every day. So as young people, we have that sense of being invincible, and we're willing to take risks, and that's biologically driven. But the reality is, you can never predict the unexpected. And that's what makes driving such a high risk factor, is if you're not paying full attention, if you're not looking at everything that goes on around you and prepared for that unexpected, then it's very difficult to avoid a collision. And for young people, there's just the thought that it won't happen for them. And the reality is, it does. As you said, road crashes are a leading cause of death for young people, not just in Canada, but in many jurisdictions around the world.
That's true. And the other thing that I learned on this journey that I've taken is that the human brain doesn't mature until around age 25. So for young people, in many ways, that's a great thing. They're out there, they're meeting people, they're trying new things. That is really a good thing. When it comes to driving, not such a good thing, because like this young man, prone toward risky, kind of showing off for friends. that sort of thing, and not really understanding consequences. Invincible.
One of the things that we collision sites is, that most of the time it's not the driver that suffers the horrible consequences, it's the passenger. And that many times they'll be out of the vehicle and we'll be working on the collision site, and you'll hear them going, well, I didn't mean it, I'm sorry. And it may sound very hard, but firefighters have to against those things, because now suicide is becoming one of the leading causes of death for first responders. And it's because we're going to so many of these scenes now, especially when it involves youth.
Yeah, and I think you're entirely right, Tim. I mean, for young people in those, when young drivers are crash involved, it's more often the other road users who are the ones who are killed. And to your point, Anne-Marie, talking about kind of the ripple effects and how the community is impacted, and I think first responders are often forgotten as being most impacted because they see it way more than they should, and through the course of their career, and the long-term effects of seeing those crashes and PTSD on first responders is one that we don't typically think about, but yet they are certainly among the groups that are most impacted by crashes, and most tragically young people in the prime of their lives when they're impacted.
The stories that I hear are, oh, my favorite song came on, we turned up the radio, it was a wonderful time, and then it wasn't. Crashes go so quickly from a great time to life altering, can never take it back time. And true, passengers are as much at risk. Robyn and I were talking about this a little bit earlier, and in many places, young people are putting off learning to drive, especially when they come from communities where there's good public transit and they don't necessarily need it. But the fact is that they're riding with someone. I mean, you can't always get to the show or the concert or to a friend's house with public transit. You have to get in the car with somebody. And if your teen is not the one who is, as a parent, if your teen is not the one who is learning to drive and under your care, then who are they riding with? And as Tim mentioned, I mean, often it's the passenger who is impacted. So that's another thing that I think parents should be aware of. And this podcast is really intended for parents to talk about all of those kinds of things. Robyn, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about some of the things that you see.
Right. So to your point, Anne-Marie, with respect to delaying licensure, you're exactly correct. We are seeing that, whereas many of us, when we were younger, 16 was that rite of passage. The first thing you do is go out and get your license. And today you're seeing younger people wait until they're 17, 18, 19 to get their license. And one of the reasons for that is the peer pressure that goes with driving. If you're the driver among your circle of friends, then two things happen. One, everybody wants to drive with you and be a passenger, but there's also that peer pressure in the car. Drive a little faster. We're listening to this song, turn up the music, pick up my friend, I want to go here, I want to go there. And for young people driving, that can be a lot of pressure to deal with. So I think the most important thing for parents to really reinforce with their teens is that when they are driving, they are in charge, and what happens in the car is under their control, and encouraging them to speak up to their friends when that risk taking is being encouraged, to say, no, that we're not doing that. Don't distract me with your phone. No, I can't have the music that loud. No, I need you to sit in your seat and not talk to me, because as we talked about earlier, it's such a complicated task. And the other thing parents need to know is having passengers in the vehicle, young passengers in the vehicle with a young driver, creates risk. And the more passengers, the more risk. So for example, just having one passenger in the car, one young passenger, increases your crash risk. When you add two or three, it exponentially increases your risk. And for young people learning to drive, like in the first 6 months of licensure, a 16-year-old is 6 times more likely to crash than an adult driver. That's with an empty car, no impairment, no distraction, just straight driving in that first 6 months at the age of 16, their crash risk is incredibly high. So for young people, to recognize the responsibility of driving, and for young drivers to be able to speak up confidently to ensure that they have an environment that's safe to drive in is so important.
That just sounds so easy, speak up, but nobody wants to lose the ride. Nobody wants to piss off their friend. No, it's, nobody wants to look like a wimp. So it's complicated. It's not a simple task.
I think one of the really important things is that people have to be introduced to driving properly and with methodology. I'll give you an example. I used to ride a motorcycle when I was young. I had a crash when I was 19. I made sure I could get back on. Then I didn't ride for about 35 years. So then I bought a bike again, and I went, I'm not comfortable with the fact that I was off. So even though I've got EVO training, emergency vehicle operation with air, I've got a class 5 license that allows me to drive. Before I drove my bike, what I did was I went and took motorcycle lessons, and I learned a ton. Even though I had already ridden a motorcycle for a number of years, and it introduces things like when we're talking about youth and passengers in the cars, everyone in the eye when they talk. So what happens? They'll be driving along like this, and then they look directly at the passenger and speak to them. And that is one of the very small examples of being taught how to drive. Like, they have to understand, even though I'm looking at the windshield, the passenger can still hear me without me diverting my attention fully to there and losing sight of proper instruction. I trained my sons how to drive. I trained them to EVO standards, okay? Not ordinary driving standards. Emergency vehicle operation. It helped one of them. He's a firefighter now. But proper instruction, I believe, should be mandated. And I have no interest in driving schools. This isn't a partisan. They used to teach it here in BC in school. They used to have safe driving classes in school, and I think that would be a wonderful way to introduce kids in a safe manner under direct supervision and not in a commercial sense. It's coming in is easier. Learning it at the front end is a whole lot easier.
And so just building on that, Tim, I think to your point about spending time in the vehicle with your sons as they're learning to drive. So driver education is a tremendous tool to teach young people the basics of driving, but parental involvement as teens learn to drive is equally important. And we see that is one of the factors that can increase the effectiveness of driver education. So the more time parents spend in their car, making sure that they're learning those proper techniques. And for some instances, it may be a good refresher course for parents driving. I think that is part of helping them build their confidence. So to your point, Anne-Marie, when those teens are in the car, it gives the young driver something to fall back on this is how my parents have taught me to drive. This is important. And there's always the fallback position of, if I do that, my parents aren't going to let me have the car.
Absolutely.
Right? To really manage that conversation, because certainly for young people, it's hard to speak up, but it's hard the first time. The more you do it, the more comfortable you become with it. And your friends learn very quickly that that's just how it's going to be. They can walk or they can ride with you, but if they ride with you, they ride on your terms. And I think it's important for young people to be confident speaking up to their friends and having those conversations, and for parents to be involved in them learning to drive and encouraging those behaviors.
Absolutely. And driving is very complicated, as we've said, but we also, in Canada, we have 4 real seasons. And that means practicing all year round. What I've seen with parents in practice, and practice is not 150 trips to Loblaws. It's deliberate practice on country roads, on city streets, interacting with trucks at high speed, interacting with streetcars, all of that. It's really varied, deliberate practice. And today we have roundabouts, we have double left turn lanes. It's complex.
Some of the characteristics that you see in crashes, having attended so many crash scenes. So for young people, are there things that stand out in your mind as really top risks for them?
A lot of, speed is an obvious one, but they're usually not just one thing that's associated, a singular. They also think, well, I passed my first level, now I know everything. And that's when they get really dangerous. Some police forces do a really interesting thing. And what they have to do is they have a driving instructor beside them in the front seat. They're in the thing, and they have to talk about everything they observe as they're driving. So, and I'll tell you, if you try doing this, it is difficult. Yeah. So as you're driving along, you're going, okay, there's a stop sign on the right. Okay, this is a cross street. Oh, there's a chopper on the right-hand side. Okay, over on here, it looks like there's a patch of water or ice. So and you have to continually talk about how the environment around you is changing, which means you are totally focused, looking forward all the time, using your maximum. And I'll tell you, you try doing that for 2 minutes, it is incredibly exhausting. And it's those kind of things that as you learn how to do them properly, you avoid the stupid mistakes that come with familiarity of doing a task.
I think it's a really good point, and we actually have an episode with Christine Raby, who owns driving schools, Apex driving schools in the Niagara region, and it's called commentary driving. And it's something that parents can do with 15, 16-year-olds before they have a license by putting them in the passenger seat in the front, and the parent starts with the commentary, what the parent sees. And then when they become more familiar, you turn it over to the passenger. And it's not only, you see the change in the speed limit, you see the light is turning yellow, you see a car that looks like it might exit the parking lot on your right, and then predicting what that car might do. So it's a really excellent exercise and something that's very simple to do, but you're right, exhausting.
Yeah. And I think it really underscores how complex driving is for all of those who take our ability to drive for granted and feel very comfortable doing it. It's a good reminder as to really how much information there is to process.
And if you've been driving for a period of time, you don't realize how much you know. It's like walking. You don't concentrate on putting one foot in front of the other. That happens automatically. And we start to drive like that. And you're accepting information and making judgments without ever really thinking about them if you've been driving for a period of time. But that new driver, it's not the same. And they look like adults, but they are not.
When you're talking about the complexity of the task and how as adults we take it for granted, I think as parents in particular we take it for granted. And the one thing that we're not aware of is that our young children are watching us and how we drive from a very, very young age in the car. So as a parent, if you have a tendency to speed or to use your phone or to not wear your seatbelt, those are behaviors your young child picks up on, and they're very likely to adopt those behaviors as they drive. Because I think as parents, we all know, do as I say, not as I do. That's not good enough. So from a very young age, parents have to be in tune with ensuring that when their children are watching them drive, that they're learning the right things and not the wrong things.
And I think, this year I just bought a brand new truck, and it's got...
You're buying a lot of vehicles there, Tim.
And you love to drive.
What they do is they take a lot of the functions that you can do by feel, and they change them into something on the screen. And like I said, it's a 12-inch screen. That damn thing's huge. And one of my sons also has a Tesla. It has one button, the four-way flasher. Well, the changing over of being able to not look down and hit my heater and change it by feel is now, if I miss one button by about 1/4 of an inch, I hit the wrong button. And that screen is incredibly distracting because everything is key. As a young I would recommend as a young driver, they should block those damn screens right out.
Yeah.
That's it. You know, here I've been driving for an awful long time, in the 50 plus years, and that screen, still about 4 months later, is incredibly distracting to me, and I have to really work. And sometimes if I'm going to do, I pull up to the side of the road, put it in park, make sure I punch the right buttons, and then off I go again. Those and the Tesla one is horrible. It's you can't do anything without looking at that screen and making sure you hit the right button and that.
That becomes even a bigger problem for young people, because they're very quick to tell you, okay, you might have a little more driving experience. I hear this quite often. You might have a little more driving experience, but I have great texting ability. I know technology. So they don't have the same concerns about using the technology because they've lived with it all their lives. They're very, very comfortable with it, but it still is a distraction. It still takes their eyes off the road, their minds off the task of driving. And so I agree with you. I think that those screens can be a terrible distraction.
Right. And I think research has shown that we often underestimate how much time our eyes are off the road. So we think, looking at our phone or looking at that screen, we think it's like 1 or 2 seconds. But we know from studies that more than 2 seconds with your eyes off the road does increase your crash risk. And the studies that they have done, asking people to estimate how much time they were looking away versus how much time they actually were, it's a difference between like 2 seconds and 7 seconds or 10 seconds or 12 seconds. So we tend to really underestimate those glances away and how long they actually are.
Well, and physiology really plays in here also. Is one of the things they teach you, because you on a motorcycle is, and if you ride a bicycle, it's the same. You go and you steer where your eyes go.
Yeah.
So as I'm looking to my right to look at the screen, the connection is that I will start to drift towards the right. Okay. So in BC, that can be a bloody big cliff, or it can be a great big tree. Now in the prairies, it might be a little different. You might woof off into the wheat, but it's those people have to be taught that when I'm looking down for 2 seconds to my right, my hands are going to start turning to the right.
But you know what, Tim, I'm really glad you say that, because I have always thought that. Because I agree with you. You drive, your hands take you where your eyes are going. And if you're holding the phone down to the left or holding it down to the right, I'm sure that, but I've never seen any statistics about that. But I do believe that to be true. And so to hear you say that kind of validates something that I already believe.
Yeah, that's actually taught in the motorcycle course, because you shift your hands just a little bit, especially on the wide parts. You're exiting stage right pretty quick.
And depending on your speed too, at a high speed, just that little movement of the steering wheel can take you off in a trajectory that can get you in a lot of trouble.
Yeah. So far, we're only talking about steering wheels. More and more, I don't know about in Ontario, but more and more people are turning to motorcycles and bicycles on the road. And it is, you're even seeing people with their left hand riding a motorcycle at 60, 70 km at their phone.
Oh my God, I've seen it.
It is incredible. And same with bicycles. It's the same thing. Now you got those motorized scooters. Oh,
yeah, God. Yeah.
It doesn't take much balance to fire one of those babies into the oncoming traffic. Eh?
And that's from two perspectives. If we're talking about the new drivers, that's something that they have to be aware of that can come into their range, or as a driver on a scooter, or, so it affects young people from both sides.
Right. And I think that raises an important point, Anne-Marie, about sharing the road. Long time ago, it was kind of just cars and pedestrians and some bicycles, but certainly with the changes in the last few years, and certainly with the pandemic and people driving less and choosing other forms of active transportation, today on the road, yes, you're much more likely to encounter other types of road users, and they're certainly much more vulnerable. And that's why there's been such a push to reduce speed. And I think for young people, learning the importance of managing your speed so that you can control the vehicle is really an important one, because those people walking and riding their bikes and riding scooters, they don't have that hard protective exterior. So when we are driving a vehicle, which is a huge, heavy moving mass that does not stop quickly or easily, we're really putting at risk the other people on the road, and the attentiveness that we pay in terms of what's going on around us is so important, more so important today than ever for that reason.
Yeah, I heard cars once described as metal bombs filled with gasoline that we hurtle down a road at 120 kilometers an hour. And I don't totally agree with that, but it is frightening. It's and then we put people on top of them, right? So I think that which brings up another point that Robyn and I were talking about a little bit earlier, and that is about parents and the choices they make as far as vehicles for young people. And I've heard from parents for a long time, well, we'll put them in an old beater for the first year or two, and that way if the car gets a little scratched, doesn't really matter, it's an old car anyway, we'll junk it at the end of 2 years. Robyn, maybe comment on that.
Right. So I think that's a common philosophy for a lot of parents because cars are expensive, and we think as young people are learning to drive that getting them an older car might be better. But I think what parents do need to think about is a lot of older vehicles don't have the safety features today, and a lot of the safety features that we have on vehicles, the advanced driver assistance systems, are very sophisticated, and they have done a tremendous job in reducing crashes. And for that reason, driving those vehicles, we're so much more safer, and the government has urged the rollout of these features, some of these features across all vehicles much more quickly because of the crash protection. So as parents are teaching their young people to drive, I think it's important that they also think about the safety of the vehicle that they're in, because at the end of the day, what you want home safely at the end of the day is your child. And not necessarily your car if you had to choose. So I think parents thinking through safety features and the protections offered by the vehicle their children are driving, and of course spending time with them again in the vehicle, be familiar, help them build their confidence, give them lots of opportunity to practice in all kinds of weather and road conditions. And we can be less concerned about crashes and more concerned about teaching them to be good drivers and to be safe.
And some jurisdictions are starting to look at the capacity of the vehicle also. So out here, when you're driving along and you see an L or an N on a brand new Audi sports car that'll do a couple 100K easily, some reasonableness with you don't go out and buy the kid a high part, like in Tula's example, a 5-liter Mustang right off the bank. Okay, and you have to have the capacity that matches the experience. And you see a lot of brand new cars with an L or an N on, and they are high-speed vehicles. And it's just damn dangerous.
Yeah.
I think that just because you can afford that car doesn't mean you should buy it, because it's anything that is too high powered is not only dangerous, because a crash at 30 kilometers is very different from a crash at 150 kilometers an hour. So there is that, but there's also, when we're talking about peer pressure that we were talking about earlier, and oh, come on, you can take that guy. Let's see what this baby can do. Yeah. You get into those kinds of competitions. Even going back to your story at the beginning there, Tim, this young man kind of showing off for other students. So toning it down, getting a reasonable vehicle. We actually, one of our episodes is on that. We did an episode with Becca Wiest from the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, and they're the crash test dummy people and talk a lot about best vehicles for teens. One interesting thing, I think it was interesting for me, was at one time when my daughter was young, and clearly I jumped into this way more than most people do. But when my daughter was just learning to drive, when she just got her license, she was about 17, 18, and we needed a new vehicle. We had one vehicle that was 10 years old. It had been a top safety pick in its day, but 10 years old. And we got a new vehicle. Well, we gave the new vehicle to her because it had better safety and we were the experienced drivers, my husband and I. But when I went to insure it, the interesting thing was the insurance rates on both vehicles were exactly the same, because the older one, I didn't need to put collision on because if it got smacked, it didn't matter. But the other one had better occupant protection. And that's really what the insurance is about. That's where the big bucks are. You can 50, 60,000, 40,000, 5,000, 2,000. You can replace the vehicle. But you can't replace the occupants. So I thought that was, I was quite fascinated that the insurance for the same, the 10-year-old car and the brand new car was the same.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and to your point about speed and how we often think about speeding in terms of extreme speeding, and certainly with the pandemic, we've seen media reports across the country of some of that extreme speeding, but for many drivers, going 10 kilometers over or 20 kilometers over is not that big a deal. And I think as adults, we underestimate crash risk with speed, and it's important to think about what's the message you're giving your child as they're learning to drive, that it's okay to speed, because going just 10 kilometers over the speed limit doubles your crash risk. And when you're going 20 kilometers over the speed limit, that increases your crash risk 6-fold. So we often think about speed in terms of significant differences in speed, and the reality is very small increases in speed have significant consequences for crash risk, and the damage that gets done at those higher speeds, and whether or not people are able to survive a collision or not.
Well, it's interesting also to look at the other way. What happens? There's a major road that I live just off of 16th Avenue, and it is it's a fundamental link between gravel beds and Surrey and that. So there's a lot of gravel trucks that travel on this 2-lane road, okay, one each direction. And what happens is, because of the hills, the loads slow down, which gets the people, as they start to line up, impatient. And literally what they do is, when they hit an intersection, they have the left-hand turn slots, they hammer the accelerator turn slot on their side, shoot through the intersection into the oncoming left-hand turn slot, and switch over back into the lane. So slow-moving vehicles create impatience, which, as you get into more and more of an urban setting, it creates dangerous situations, and people go, even I can get this thing. And it is incredible, some of the crashes that we're seeing on some of these roads because of the slow-moving vehicles creating impatience for the faster ones.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point. As drivers, in the protective exterior of our vehicle, we often feel like we're in control and we know what we're going to do, so we feel like we're in control. And the reality is, you don't control anything else on the road. You don't control who stops in front of you. You don't control who pulls out to go left. You don't control slow-moving vehicles. And I think that's really an important takeaway for not just for young people, but for drivers of all ages to understand, is when you're in those situations, you really have to ask yourself, how confident are you that everyone else is going to act on the road in the way that you expect them to? Because I think anyone who drives at any point realizes that there's always that unexpected. So back to what we talked about earlier, Anne-Marie, that unexpected, you just can't anticipate when it's going to happen, and that's why you have to be alert at all times, but also follow those rules of the road, to keep everyone safe.
And if we take a situation like that, and the parent is driving and they deke around this vehicle the way you're talking about, Tim, what's going to happen a year or two down the road when that teen is in the driver's seat and they've seen their parents do it? Seemed like no big deal, but they have a whole lot less experience. I think that's one thing that I would really like parents to take away, is that how you drive is exactly the high bar for how your teen is going to drive, but with a lot less experience. And I say the high bar because they believe they really have mastered technology, but they don't have the experience of driving for so many years. And they'll follow their parents. One of the things that I tell parents is that if they have been using their phone, or if they have been deking around that dump truck, I don't expect your kids to realize that you're changing your behavior. You need to have that conversation. I've been doing this for so many years. I've been lucky. And I realize that now. You are the most important thing in my life. And I'm just beginning today, I am changing this. I will never do that again. And because I want to be a good role model for you. And we have to have those conversations. Don't expect them to realize that beginning 2 weeks ago, Thursday, you put your phone down, you're not picking it up anymore. They'll remember that you picked it up all the time. So I think we need to have some of those conversations and really have a little bit of a reality check about our own driving.
And I think to your point, Anne-Marie, about the time spent in the car. So parents often think, they'll do the required number of hours of training, so to speak. And yet we know from research, that a minimum of 50 hours, and in some jurisdictions, it's not in Canada, but in other countries, it's up to 120 hours, which really underscores how important it is for teens to have that time in the car, supervised time with a parent, and to be learning, because that's really how long it takes you to learn to become a good driver and to form those habits. And the more time parents spend in the car with a young person, the more likely those habits that they develop at that point are going to be the ones that stick, that will keep them safe.
That's right. And make sure that the habits you're passing on are really good ones. So, yes. I mean, if somebody isn't sure, but you know what, as I'm talking about this, I'm thinking about other things people don't know. And that is airbags, right? I started driving well before we had airbags. Well, I've seen people driving so close to that steering wheel that if that airbag ever deployed, they'd, their chest would be crushed. Mm-hmm. I've seen people, the seatbelt is too uncomfortable, it's rubbing my neck. They put the shoulder strap over their shoulder. All those kinds of things. We really need to, if we're going to be teaching young people how to drive, we really need to clean up our own acts first.
So some of the statistics around seatbelts, just between 1990 and 2000, your seatbelts saved about 11,000 lives.
Wow.
Your seatbelt, irrespective of all the new technology on vehicles and the advanced safety features, your seat belt is still the most important thing that keeps you safe in a crash, because it keeps you from being ejected from the vehicle, and it keeps you in the car where it's going to be safer than being ejected, particularly at a high speed. So yes, the seat belt and learning how to do it and do it every time, and all of our safety checks, turning off our phone, checking our mirrors, all those things should be part and parcel, just like getting in the car and putting on your seat belt before you start the ignition.
Absolutely.
When it comes to airbags, it's really interesting because they're deadly weapons in some aspects.
We just need to be smart about how we use them. And that means being far enough back that you're protected. I remember years ago not understanding them, and we'd go to IKEA and end up with 16 boxes in the car. So I'm sitting in the front seat, kind of squished toward the front because I've got all this stuff behind me. And if that airbag ever deployed, it could have killed me.
Well, an example of that too is you can't put a child seat in the front seat, right. and especially forward facing, because that will kill it. It will kill the child in that seat. It has that kind of impact, and those kind of things. Safety devices can bite you. They're necessary, like seat belts. God, anyone that doesn't put a seat belt on is committing suicide. But you got to respect the safety features in a vehicle. Otherwise, they'll turn into biting you in the ass.
In the last 10 years, vehicles have changed so much. So now you have people driving their new cars off the lot, and things are buzzing and things are beeping and things are, vibrating, and people don't often take the time to learn about those safety features. And I know, Tim, we've talked about this, is the time to learn about your safety features is not as you're losing control of your vehicle, right? So for parents, and part of that, that exercise, as well as with driver educators, spending the time to learn what features you have and how they work and what are some of the prompts that they give you. So, you know, when you hear them, you're not kind of looking around wondering what the heck's going on, what did I miss? Because like I said, that's not really the time you want to figure out how those safety features work.
And one thing that you know, I think is really important to discuss when you're talking about new drivers is the unpredictability of people now. Like, you're driving along sometimes, and it kills me when I see a parent with a toddler, and the toddler's walking on the curbside, and the parent's walking is walking on the opposite side, because they'll shoot out, and it's something that I think new drivers have to. That's why those 2 seconds are so important, because a skateboarder can fall, hit a little rock and fall, or a kid can just jolt out of from between the cars. And the unpredictability of pedestrians and the lack of them paying attention with distracted walking is really
absolutely. I completely agree with you. The other thing that is parking lots. People who don't have the hands of their kids in parking lots. And of course, the kids are below the back thing, unless you've got a backup camera and you're actually using it, you don't see them. I don't know. I think that really part of the purpose of this podcast is to help parents understand how complicated it all is. And that, you know, just going back and forth to church or to the grocery store is not enough. I mean, this is a complex task, and there are so many things we can't control that we really need to invest the time. I talked to a parent once, and I was talking about driving school and the importance of picking a good driving school, which is another episode in this. But it's talking about the importance of that. And at the end of it all, he came up to me and he said, Anne-Marie, I spent $300 today on a hockey stick for my son and never thought twice about it. And I was shopping for the cheapest driving school I could find. And it's like, wow, give your head a shake. This is something they're going to be doing for the next 60 years. So you want them to get a grounding of really good skills, and all driving schools are not the same. So there is that. Yeah. One of the things that I find very frustrating in this field is that if you share information or open conversations that get people thinking, increase skills, they do a better job, and you avoid a crash, you never know.
And when you think about the difference between a near miss and a collision, you know, that's measured in millimeters and milliseconds. And that, you know, 2 seconds that we talked about earlier, giving yourself that extra time to try and avoid a collision, because unlike video games, you know, in real life, you don't get the extra lives, you don't get the do-overs, and you can never take it back, and it does impact you forever. In the research field, we talk about the issue of conspicuity, which is how easy it is to see that. And I think as drivers on the road, particularly young drivers, you're used to seeing cars. So you're looking for a car, and particularly when you're learning to turn at intersections, you learn to judge the speed and distance of a car coming towards you based on its size. And you see a lot of collisions with motorcycles simply because they're smaller. You assume they're further away, you assume they're not traveling as fast, and you're more inclined to turn in front of them thinking you have that time, when in fact you don't. And it's really just because of that smaller size. And then on the flip side of that, with larger trucks, right, there's all different types of vehicles on the roads.
Yeah, and then, I mean, we talked a little bit about behaviors, some of the behaviors around driving, and going back to teens in that first vehicle. I mean, I remember like the prestige that you felt the first time that it didn't even have to be your own car. It could be your parents' car, right? Yep. That you're the one driving to school, and everybody wants to go for lunch together, that kind of thing. And so there's a tendency to have, you know, we tend to think whether it's speeding or seatbelts, it's about the ticket, right? Yeah. It's don't want to get a ticket, so hide, get in the trunk. share a seatbelt, those kinds of things
Yeah.
to avoid the ticket. But it's not about the ticket. The ticket is to reinforce good behavior.
Yeah.
So,
The ticket is the least of your worries.
yeah, that's right.
yeah.
I think we need to start rethinking about driving. It is a very serious task. It can be fun. I mean, oh my gosh, you remember as a kid, when you went on a road trip with friends, I mean, the most fun in the world.
Yeah.
But it's fun, it's exciting, it's you can go places, and our world is a lot smaller now. You can drive in China or Israel or New York City. Well, New York City is a little tricky, but you can drive anywhere, right? Our world is a small place. If you've got a grounding of good skills, you can drive anywhere.
Yeah. Well, and particularly, I mean, you were talking earlier about the seasons and learning to drive in all the different seasons, and I was thinking the season that we didn't talk about was construction.
Oh my
Right?
gosh, yes.
Because
yes.
it used to be kind of a summer thing, and now it's a year-round thing. And for young people learning to drive, I mean, there's a lot of variations in construction scenes for particular reasons. So, being slower around those construction zones and learning whether you're looking for signalized directions, whether there's flag people out on the road, and most importantly, really slowing down when you go past them, right? Because people, that is their workplace, and construction workers, like first responders, are just at very high risk on the road, and speed and distraction are two really significant factors that impact their workplace, so to speak.
You talked about slowing down around the construction zone, and that's for sure. But in a lot of those, like heading north in the summer on the 400, you have a whole zone that's now 80 instead of 100, and people are still doing 120. And I think the thinking is that we're a mass of cars. They can't stop us all, right? But it's not about the ticket. It's about what can happen at that speed when there's something else going on the road.
Right. And when everyone else is doing that faster speed, it creates the sense that you have to go with traffic, right? And you often hear that argument made.
Yes.
And yet in reality, what it is you're doing is you're pushing people who are not comfortable driving faster to drive faster. And, I think it's important that we focus on speed and understand the consequences with speed, because at the end of the day, I don't think any of us are willing to die to get to our destination.
And to die to get there,
that's what you're doing.
Yeah, to get there 3 minutes early. There are all kinds of studies about that. By the time you look at everybody slows down, everybody speeds up, it's a couple of minutes difference. Yeah. And how much does that matter to you?
It's a very small time benefit, like literally in minutes. But going, like I said earlier, the 10 kilometers or the 20 kilometers over the speed limit, you're tremendously increasing your crash risk for 2 minutes. At the end of the day, you got to ask yourselves, is it worth it? And is it worth it to be teaching your child that that's a good decision to make?
Exactly.
I mean, there's an alarming amount of first responders that are killed every year.
Yep.
At collision scenes as they're trying to do their job. And, laws around when you see, especially a police vehicle that has pulled over a vehicle and the lights are on, you lower your speed. And it comes down to respect.
Yeah.
And respecting everyone else that is on the road. And what that creates is, there's nothing better than when you're putting your signal on and someone slows down just a hair so you can come in instead of jumping ahead and trying to get in. And it's those kind of behaviors that more and more now, as people are crunching for time because they're so damn busy now.
To your point, Tim, slowing down, I mean, the officers and the first responders are out there to make the roads safer. And we really need to respect what they're doing on the road, because they're doing it for us at the end of the day. So we should, respond in kind and make sure that they stay safe.
It's a real concern of the whoever is the OIC, the officer in command, about efficiency of getting this person out in a timely manner versus maintaining the safety of first the crew and then yourself as you're trying to slow people down. And I'll tell you, it's a major job of an officer to do that juggle until thank God the police come on scene.
One of the things you mentioned there, Tim, is the golden hour. And that is that within that hour, after an incident happens, a crash happens, then to get that person to medical assistance. Yeah. And harder in some areas than others. If we're talking about rural areas, if we're talking about Northern Ontario, much harder to get them the help they need, which is another reason to slow down and be more aware, because it's higher risk when you can't get to help within that hour.
As loud as the sirens and different sounding devices are on emergency vehicles, it is incredible how many times you come up code, they can't hear you over the thump, 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 thump.
True. The bass, and yep.
And especially in a fire truck, like we're the most visible, like they're big vehicles. God help those poor ambulance and those cops that are in smaller vehicles trying to weasel their way through. They did a study on fire engines in Vancouver. Year speed of an engine responding in Vancouver, code 3 is 20 kilometers.
Wow.
That's as fast as you can go between going left and going right, and not getting out of the way and not yielding, and that's how slow and that really impacts on whatever emergency you go.
Well, the other thing that brings up, this is another conversation that parents need to have. It's what do you do when you hear the siren? Because I hear sirens, and in a lot of cases, nobody knows what to do, then nobody's pulling over. So those are other conversations that you need to have. And there was a clip that was done by one of the insurance companies, and a siren is coming up behind, and the new driver, the learning driver, is in the driver's seat, and the father is in the other one. And he says, "Oh, there's a siren, pull over." And she says, "Which way?" So it's like not only like giving an instruction, but a clear instruction. It's pull over to the right, signal to the right. It's thinking that way and helping them understand that in an emergency situation, this is what they need to do.
When you're a driver of an emergency vehicle, it is you want to talk about being aware of your surroundings. You see some of the strangest behavior on the face of this planet.
But that brings up the point too, that you need to know what the local rules are. Yeah. And that comes back to training. Don't expect that a young person is going to intuitively know what to do. So we have covered a lot of ground.
We have.
And I do hope that this helps parents understand how much there is. I mean, we've talked about a lot of things, but we've barely scratched the surface. Yeah. And the point is that this is a really dangerous task, that it requires some attention. Parents, when my daughter was young, she took piano, she had a math tutor, she played soccer. All of those things cost money, right? And we devote a lot of time and enjoy doing it. We want the best for them. This is something, again, and I've said it like 3 times now, but they'll be doing for 60 years. And it's something that will impact their lives. So it's worth the investment. And teaching them, making sure, not necessarily teaching them yourself, but a lot of practice, and making sure that you have the conversations about cell phones and technology and doing other stuff behind the wheel. Talking about speed and saying, I'm really sorry, I have been speeding. Effective today, that's changing, because you matter so much to me. I need to be a good role model for you. And I don't want to be putting my life in danger or yours. So today that will change. And I think we all need to kind of reevaluate where we are, and to make sure that our young people make it to their old age. and still driving and exploring the world. So thank you very much, both of you. I really appreciate your time. We talked about a lot of different things, and I hope that parents will stay tuned and watch or listen, because we're providing this in a couple of different ways, to the other episodes about things like best vehicles for teens, about starting them off with driving school, how to pick a good one, or some of the things you need to cover if you're going to do it yourself. I mean, everybody understands, kind of what's possible within their realm, but this is an investment of your time, and it's absolutely worth it. And thank you both very, very much.
Thanks, Anne-Marie.
Thanks for having us.
Before You Hand Over the Keys was brought to you by Teens Learn to Drive. Check out our website at teenslearntodrive.com for more information, videos, and resources.